My brother Carl stood in our mother's kitchen with a realtor beside him and told me the family farm belonged to him now. He had a deed in his hand, a sale agreement on the table, and a smile that said he believed I would be too heartbroken to fight. "Mom knew you never had the stomach for this place," he said. "She wanted me to have it. That farm had been in our family for 3 generations. I spent my childhood feeding chickens before school, and our mother spent her final years telling me she wanted the land protected from developers." At the county clerk's office, Carl presented the deed dated 3 months before our mother died. The clerk reviewed it, then disappeared into the records room. When she returned, she placed an older file on the counter and opened a trust document our mother had signed years earlier. Carl's name was there. So was mine. But the deed he carried conflicted with a restriction that could not be ignored. And the signature on it had been witnessed on a day our mother was in a hospital bed 60 miles away. Subscribe for more stories where records reveal the truth. And comment, should family land ever be sold without every heir seeing the original file? My name is Rebecca Clark. I am 68 years old, a widow, and until the day Carl laid that deed on our mother's kitchen table, I thought grief had done the worst thing it could possibly do to our family. I was wrong. Grief can make a house quiet. It can make a chair across from you feel too empty. It can make a person stare at a set of keys in their palm and forget, for one long moment, what door they were meant to open. But grief does not turn a brother into a stranger. That part is a choice. The farm sat just outside Willow Creek, Ohio, at the end of a 2-lane road lined with maples and old fence posts. It was 112 acres of rolling pasture, soybean fields, a red barn with a roof that had been repaired more times than I could count, and a white farmhouse with a porch that leaned slightly toward the east. The locals called it the Mercer Farm, even after my mother married my father, Thomas Clark. Her maiden name was Mercer, and the land had come through her side of the family. My great-grandfather had bought the first 40 acres in 1919. My grandfather added the lower field after the war. My mother and father spent nearly 50 years making sure it stayed a farm even when other families sold their land to builders and watched neat little subdivisions rise where their corn used to grow. When I was little, I believe the farm had moods. In spring, it smelled like wet soil, diesel fuel, and the sweet hay we stored in the loft. In July, the fields shimmered under the heat, and my father would stand at the edge of the drive with his hands on his hips, watching the sky like he could personally negotiate with the rain. In winter, the barn creaked in the wind, and on Sundays, after church, my mother made enough food for whoever happened to come through the door. Roast chicken, potatoes, green beans cooked too long, apple pie cooling by the kitchen window. Carl and I grew up there together. At least, that was the story I used to tell myself. The truth was, we grew up on the same land, but we did not grow up carrying it in the same way. Carl was 2 years younger than I was. As a boy, he could charm the bark off a tree. He had a crooked smile, quick hands, and a talent for telling our mother exactly what she wanted to hear. When Dad asked who had left the gate unlatched, Carl would look wounded. When Mom asked who had tracked mud across the clean floor, he would somehow make her laugh before she remembered to be angry. I was the quieter one. I did chores without being asked. I fed the chickens before school. I learned how to keep the accounts in the old ledger book beside my father. When I was 16, I knew how to change the oil in the tractor, stack firewood so it would not fall, and recognize when one of the calves was getting sick. Carl knew how to leave before the hard part began. By the time he was 24, he had moved to Columbus, taken a job selling industrial equipment, and started visiting the farm mainly on holidays. He would arrive late, bring expensive bakery cookies, compliment Mom's cooking, and leave before anyone asked him to repair a loose rail or help Dad haul feed. I never hated him for it. That is important for me to say. I did not think I was better than my brother. I had married William at 22 and moved into our little house in Willow Creek. We raised our daughter, Claire, with careful budgets and second-hand furniture. I worked at the community library for 31 years, and William worked maintenance at the high school until his heart finally gave out 6 years ago. I had my own life, my own responsibilities, but when Dad's health began failing, it was me who drove out after work to take Mom to appointments. It was me who sat in the hospital waiting room with a paper cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. It was me who helped Dad manage the farm books when his fingers stiffened from arthritis, and when Dad died, Carl stood beside me at the funeral and held my arm. "You're so good with Mom," he whispered. "She's lucky to have you." At the time, I thought it was gratitude. Now I understand it may have been permission. After Dad was gone, Mom stayed on the farm alone for nearly 3 years. She was 78 when she finally admitted the stairs were getting difficult and the winters were too much. Still, she refused every suggestion that she sell. "Your father and I made a promise," she would say. The promise was never about money. Developers had been circling the land for years by then. A company from Dayton had bought several farms along the highway and started mailing glossy brochures to property owners. Their pictures showed white fences, manicured lawns, and families walking dogs beside streets that had names like Heritage Lane and Meadowbrook Crossing. They called it progress. Mom called it pavement. One evening, while I was washing dishes after dinner, she stood at the kitchen window watching the last light settle over the back field. "Your daddy knew what would happen after we were gone," she said. I dried my hands on a dish towel and looked at her. "What do you mean?" "He knew somebody would come waving a number with too many zeros on it." She gave a soft, tired laugh. "Maybe they'll offer it to you. Maybe they'll offer it to Carl. Maybe they'll offer it to your children someday." "Mom, nobody is selling anything." She turned toward me then. Her face was older than I had wanted to admit. Her silver hair was pinned loosely at the back of her neck, and she wore one of Dad's old wool cardigans over her blouse. "People always say that before they need money," she said. "That's why a promise has to be written down somewhere besides the heart." A month later, she asked me to drive her to an attorney in town named Helen Mercer. No relation, despite the last name. Helen had handled estate planning for half the county, including my parents' wills years earlier. Mom did not tell me every detail that day. She only said she was putting the farm in order. Carl did not come. He had been invited. I knew because Mom called him from the kitchen while I was packing her medication in a little plastic organizer. But he said he had a client dinner. "It's just paperwork anyway," he told her through the speakerphone. "You and Rebecca handle paperwork better than I do." Mom did not argue. She only said, "All right, honey." I remember the way her face changed after she hung up. Not angry. That would have been easier. She looked disappointed in a way that seemed practiced, as though she had learned long ago not to expect too much from him. At Helen's office, Mom signed documents for nearly 2 hours. I sat beside her, listening carefully whenever Helen explained something, but I did not ask to read every page. I trusted my mother. I trusted the attorney, and I trusted that whatever Mom chose, she would tell us when she was ready. Before we left, Helen looked at Mom and said, "This will protect what you said you wanted protected." Mom nodded. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand. That was all. The years moved forward quietly after that. Mom gave up living at the farmhouse full-time and moved into a small apartment near my home in Willow Creek, but she never stopped thinking of the farm as hers. Every spring, she asked about the planting schedule. Every fall, she wanted to know the yield. She kept a framed photograph of the barn on her bedroom wall. Carl came around more often after she moved into town. At first, I thought it was a good thing. He took her to lunch. He brought flowers on Mother's Day. He called every Sunday evening, or at least that was what Mom told me. He began asking questions about the farm, too. Nothing obvious. Nothing that sounded dangerous. How much is the property tax these days? Who rents the south field? Has anybody made an offer lately? Mom would answer some questions and brush off others. Once, while I was visiting, I heard him say, "You know, Mom, land is only worth something if you use it." She replied, "Land has been useful to this family for over 100 years. Carl laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm just saying it could be worth a lot more if you stopped treating it like a museum." Mom looked at me across the room. I could tell she was hurt, but she did not want to fight. She never wanted a fight, so I changed the subject. That was my blind spot. I had spent so much of my life keeping peace that I mistook silence for safety. When Mom got sick the last time, everything became smaller and sharper all at once. It began with pneumonia in late January. She was admitted to Willow Creek Regional Hospital. then transferred to St. Anne's Medical Center in Dayton, when her oxygen levels would not stabilize. She was 82 by then, and the doctor warned us that recovery might take time. Carl came the first day. He stood near the foot of her hospital bed in a pressed blue shirt, looking uncomfortable beside all the machines. Mom was tired, but awake. She opened her eyes when he kissed her forehead. "I'm here, Mom," he told her. She smiled faintly. "I know. For 3 days he called me twice a day asking for updates. On the 4th day, he said work was busy and he would come back on the weekend. He did not. I did not judge him, not then. I was too busy sitting beside Mom, reading her the local paper when she could stay awake, holding a cup to her lips when her hands shook, and pretending I did not hear the fear underneath the doctor's careful voices. The day she died, the snow had started before dawn. By noon, the roads were covered in gray slush. I remember standing beside her bed after the nurse had left, one hand resting against the blanket near Mom's knee. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing had become soft and shallow. I told her that Carl loved her. I told her Claire was on her way. I told her the farm was fine. At that, her eyelids fluttered. "Rebecca," she whispered. "I'm here, Mom. The farm. I know. Don't let." Her voice broke before she could finish. I leaned closer. "Don't let what?" But she was gone before she could answer. For weeks afterward, I replayed those 2 words in my mind. Don't let. I wondered whether she had been frightened. Whether she had been trying to tell me something specific. Whether I had failed her by not asking more questions when she was still able to answer. Carl arrived at the funeral with his wife, Janice, and their son, Luke. He cried when people were watching. He gave a speech about Mom's strength, about our father's hands in the soil, about how the farm was the center of our family. Everyone said it was beautiful. I stood beside him, nodded when I was expected to nod, and tried not to feel cold inside. The week after the funeral, I went to the farmhouse alone. I wanted to collect a few things before the weather turned worse. Mom's recipe box, the quilt my grandmother made, a small ceramic chicken that had sat beside the kitchen sink for as long as I could remember. The house smelled like dust, cedar, and the faint sweetness of old apples. I was in the hallway upstairs when I heard the front door open. "Rebecca?" It was Carl. He came in without knocking, wearing work boots and a heavy coat. Behind him, a man I did not recognize was looking over the porch rail toward the lower pasture. "Who is that?" I asked. Carl glanced back. "Just somebody I know." The man gave me a polite wave but did not introduce himself. Carl walked into the kitchen and placed a manila folder on the table. "We need to talk about the farm," he said. Something in his voice made my stomach tighten. I stayed standing. "We can talk after we meet with Mom's attorney." He smiled as if I had said something naive. "There's no need to make this complicated. Carl, we have not even read the will." "I have." The room went silent. He opened the folder and removed a document with a Gold County seal near the bottom. Then he slid it across the table toward me. It was a deed. Carl's name was printed beneath the words grantee. My mother's name appeared above it. The date was 3 months before she died. "This transfers the farm to me," he said. "Mom wanted it settled while she was still alive." I stared at the paper. The signature at the bottom looked like Mom's from a distance, thin and unsteady. The kind of signature a person might make after a long illness. But I did not touch it. "What are you planning to do with it?" I asked. Carl's smile faded slightly. "Sell it." The word landed harder than I expected. "No." His eyes narrowed. "Rebecca, you don't get to say no. Mom did not want developers on that land. Mom was sick. Mom didn't understand the bills, the taxes, the repairs. You think memories pay for a new roof? You said she gave it to you." "She did. Then why are you in such a hurry to sell it?" For the first time, his face changed. Not much, just enough. The charming brother disappeared, and I saw something impatient underneath. "Because I have a buyer," he said. "And because I am not going to spend the next 20 years pretending that old barns and broken fences are some kind of sacred duty." The man outside turned toward the house. He was not a friend. He was a realtor. Carl reached for another sheet from the folder. "A preliminary agreement," he said. "They want an answer within 30 days. I looked down at the sale agreement. It listed a company I recognized from the glossy brochures Mom used to throw into the trash, Heritage Horizon Development Group. The offer was for $2.8 million. For a few seconds, I could not speak, not because the number impressed me, because Mom had known. She had known someone would come with too many zeros. Carl leaned back against the counter. You'll get something out of it. I'm not trying to cut you out. What does that mean? It means I'll be fair. I looked at him then, really looked at him, my little brother. The boy who used to hide behind my mother's skirt after he had done something wrong. The man who had missed our father's last birthday because he had tickets to a game. The son who had called our mother strong while allowing everyone else to carry the weight of her final years. You do not get to decide what fair means, I said. His mouth tightened. Then talk to a lawyer, he said. But don't waste my time acting sentimental when you don't have any legal right to stop me. He gathered the documents except for a photocopy of the deed, which he left on the table. Then he walked out with the realtor. I stood in that kitchen long after their truck disappeared down the drive. The photocopy lay beside Mom's old sugar bowl. Outside, the wind pushed against the bare branches. Somewhere in the barn, a loose piece of metal tapped steadily against the siding. I picked up the deed with both hands. At the bottom were 2 witness signatures. One belonged to a notary named Denise Fowler. The other belonged to someone named Martin Hale. I had never heard either name before. Then I looked at the date again. February 14, the same day Mom had been in a hospital bed at St. Anne's Medical Center in Dayton, 60 miles away from the farm. And for the first time since Carl put that paper in front of me, I stopped feeling heartbroken. I started feeling alert. The next morning, I put the photocopy of Carl's deed into a clear plastic sleeve and drove straight to Helen Mercer's office. I had not spoken to Helen since the week after my mother's funeral. At the time, I had been too tired to think beyond the next phone call, the next casserole dish someone brought to my house. The next night, I would lie awake, wondering whether I had said enough to Mom before she died. But now I had a question that would not let me rest. Could my brother really sell the farm without me? Helen's office sat above an old pharmacy on Main Street. The stairs were narrow and creaked beneath my shoes. I remember standing outside her door with my hand raised to knock, suddenly afraid of what I might learn. Part of me wanted Helen to say Carl was right. Not because I wanted him to have the farm. Because if he was right, then the world still made a kind of sense. It would mean my mother had made a decision I did not understand. It would mean Carl was insensitive, maybe even selfish, but not dishonest. It would mean I had not missed something terrible while I was sitting beside my mother's hospital bed. Helen opened the door herself. She was in her 70s, with a silver bob, small glasses, and the calm expression of someone who had spent a lifetime watching families bring their worst secrets into a room and call them paperwork. "Rebecca," she said gently, "I was sorry to hear about your mother." "Thank you." She must have seen something in my face, because she stepped aside without asking another question. "Come in." Her office still smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. The same framed county map hung behind her desk. I remembered sitting in that room with Mom years earlier, listening to the steady scratch of a fountain pen as Helen made notes. I placed the photocopy in front of her. "My brother says Mom transferred the farm to him," I said. "He has a buyer." Helen did not react right away. She put on her reading glasses and looked at the document in silence. I watched her eyes move down the page. Then she looked at the date. February 14. Her expression changed. Not dramatically. Helen was not a dramatic woman, but her mouth became very still. "Did Carl show you the original?" she asked. "No, only this copy." "And where did he say it was signed?" "He did not say. I know where Mom was that day, though." Helen looked up. "Where?" "At St. Anne's in Dayton. She had pneumonia. She was on oxygen. I was with her almost the entire day." Helen leaned back in her chair. "Rebecca," she said, "I need you to listen carefully. Your mother did create a trust for the farm. I drafted it at her request." My fingers tightened around the strap of my purse. "What kind of trust?" "A family land trust," she said. "Your mother wanted the farm protected from a sale to a residential developer. She was very clear about that." For a moment, I could not speak. All I could see was Mom standing at the kitchen window, looking toward the lower field. A promise has to be written down somewhere besides the heart. Helen opened a file drawer beside her desk and removed a thick folder. She laid it carefully in front of us. Written across the tab were 4 words: Mercer Family Land Trust. My throat closed. Helen opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents with my parents' names, the farm's parcel number, maps of the acreage, and a memorandum that had been recorded with the county years earlier. Then she turned to a page marked with a yellow tab. Your mother was the original trustee after your father passed, Helen explained. You and Carl were named equal beneficiaries. But there are restrictions. What restrictions? The trust does not allow the farm to be transferred to either beneficiary as an individual gift without the written consent of both beneficiaries and the trustee. I looked at her, trying to understand. So Mom could not have simply signed it over to Carl? Not without your knowledge and consent under the terms she created. My breath caught. Helen continued. More importantly, the trust says the land cannot be sold for non-agricultural development unless certain conditions are met. The trustee must obtain an independent appraisal. Both beneficiaries must receive notice, and both must sign a written consent after a 30-day review period. I thought of the sale agreement Carl had placed on the kitchen table, 30 days. He had not asked me to review anything. He had not shown me an appraisal. He had shown me a number and expected me to disappear. What if he says I agreed? I asked. Helen looked directly at me. Then we ask him to produce the agreement. I swallowed. And if he has a deed? A deed that conflicts with a recorded trust is not automatically valid, especially if the person signing it did not have the authority to transfer the property that way. My hands began to shake. Not from fear this time, from anger. For weeks, I had blamed myself for not understanding Mom's last words. I had wondered whether grief had made me foolish, whether Carl had seen something in her that I had missed. But Mom had not left the farm unprotected. She had protected it. She had simply trusted that, when the time came, one of us would be honest enough to honor what she had done. Helen pulled a legal pad toward her. First, we need to see the original deed Carl claims to have, she said. Second, I will request the recording file from the county. Third, we need confirmation of your mother's location on February 14. I can prove that, I said immediately. Helen nodded. I believe you can. But we need records, not memory. That sentence settled something inside me. Records, not memory. Carl had counted on my grief. He had counted on old family habits. He had counted on me wanting peace badly enough to let him define reality. But paper had dates, hospitals had admissions logs, and the county had files. Helen placed a hand over the trust document. Do not confront him yet, she said. Do not accuse him over the phone. Do not let him know exactly what you have learned. I do not know if I can sit in the same room with him without saying something. You can, she said. You have spent your whole life being calm when other people depend on you. Use that strength now, but use it for yourself. I left her office with copies of the trust memorandum, a list of records we needed, and an ache in my chest that felt almost like strength. My first stop was St. Anne's Medical Center. The hospital was 60 miles away, but I drove there without hesitation. The highway was gray beneath a low sky, and the radio played softly until I turned it off. I did not want noise. I wanted to remember. I remembered Mom's room on the 5th floor. I remembered the plastic chair beside her bed. I remembered the nurse named Tara, who showed me how to moisten Mom's lips with a sponge when the oxygen dried her mouth. I remembered February 14 most of all. It had been Valentine's Day. Carl had sent flowers to the hospital, a dozen red roses with a card that said, "Love you, Mom." Mom had looked at them for a long time. Then she said, "Your brother always knows what to send when he cannot be there." I had not understood what she meant. Not fully. At the hospital records department, I explained that I was my mother's daughter, and that an attorney would be requesting formal documentation. The clerk behind the counter, a young woman named Brianna, could not release everything to me without the proper paperwork. I understand, I said. I only need to know whether she was admitted on February 14. Brianna checked the system. Yes, Mom, she said. She was an inpatient from February 9th through February 21st. Was she ever discharged that day? No. Did she leave for an appointment? The clerk clicked through a few screens. No transport record, no outside appointment, nothing. I nodded slowly. Could I get that in writing? With a request from counsel, yes. Helen had already prepared one for me to deliver. By the time I walked back to my car, I was carrying a stamped receipt showing that the request had been filed. It was not the final proof, but it was the first piece of it. And it made Carl's deed look less like a misunderstanding and more like a lie. That evening, Carl called. I watched his name flash across my phone while I stood at my kitchen counter cutting carrots for soup. For 3 rings, I let it go unanswered. Then I picked up. Hello, Carl. Rebecca. His tone was unusually cheerful. I was wondering if you had thought about the offer. I have. And I would like to review the original deed and the full sale agreement. There was a pause. Small. But I heard it. You saw the deed, he said. I saw a photocopy. It is the same thing. No, I said. It is not. His voice cooled. You're letting people get into your head. I spoke with Mom's attorney. The silence on the other end lasted longer this time. When he spoke again, every trace of warmth was gone. Helen Mercer is retired. She still has her records. You don't understand how expensive that farm is to keep. I understand Mom did not want it sold to developers. She was not thinking clearly near the end. The knife in my hand stopped against the cutting board. What did you say? Carl sighed, like I was making him repeat something obvious. Mom was sick, Rebecca. You know that. She was confused. She changed her mind about things all the time. My voice came out low. She was never confused about that farm. You were there every day. You saw what she was like. Yes, I said. I was there every day. He did not answer. I could hear him breathing. Then he said, Look, I have an appointment at the clerk's office tomorrow morning. I am bringing the original deed. You can come if you want. But I am done having this dragged out. Good, I said. I will be there. He hung up without saying goodbye. The following morning, I met Helen outside the county clerk's office. The building had been there longer than I had been alive. Red brick, stone steps, brass railings polished by decades of hands. Inside, the air smelled of dust, copier toner, and old wood. Carl was already waiting near the counter. He wore a dark coat and carried the same manila folder. The realtor stood beside him, along with a younger man in a tailored suit whom I had never seen before. Carl looked at Helen, then at me. So you brought a lawyer, he said. I brought someone who knows what Mom signed, I replied. His jaw tightened. The county clerk, Mrs. Ellen Price, was a careful woman in her late 50s. She had processed property records for years and had known my parents well enough to attend Dad's funeral. Carl handed her the deed. This is the original, he said. I want to make sure the transfer is clear before the sale closes. Mrs. Price accepted the document and began reading. For the first few seconds, no one spoke. Carl kept one hand in his coat pocket. The realtor looked at the floor. The younger man kept checking his phone. Then Mrs. Price looked at the parcel number. She frowned. Mr. Clark, she said, this legal description is for the Mercer Farm property. Yes, Carl said. That is what we are here for, I understand. But the title record shows the farm was transferred to the Mercer Family Land Trust in 2018. Carl gave a short laugh. Mom handled that. This is a later deed. Mrs. Price continued reading. Was there a trustee certification attached? No. Why would there be? Because the record owner is not your mother individually, she said. It is the trust. Carl shifted his weight. My mother was the trustee. Then any conveyance would need to be made in her capacity as trustee and in accordance with the trust terms. Carl's voice rose a little. She signed the deed. That is all that matters. Helen stepped forward. Actually, she said quietly, it is not. Carl's eyes turned toward her. Helen placed a copy of the trust memorandum on the counter. The trust prohibits an individual transfer to a beneficiary without written consent from both beneficiaries, she said. It also requires specific notice and approval procedures before any development sale. Mrs. Price read the document carefully. Then she looked back at Carl. Do you have the required consents? Carl's face hardened. This is ridiculous. Do you have them? Helen asked. He did not answer. Mrs. Price turned the deed over and studied the notary section. Denise Fowler, she said. Do you know her? Carl looked at the paper. She was a mobile notary. Was she? Mrs. Price asked. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. Mrs. Price left the counter with the deed in her hand and disappeared through a gray door marked Wreckers Access Only. Carl stared after her. What is she doing? He demanded. No idea, I said. But I did have an idea. And I could see by the way Carl's fingers closed around the edge of the counter that he did too. When Mrs. Price returned, she was carrying an older file box. She set it between us. The words Mercer Family Land Trust were written across the side in faded black marker. Carl's color drained. Mrs. Price opened the box. Inside was the original trust, recorded county notices, the original deed, transferring the farm into the trust, and a copy of my mother's signed instructions. Then Mrs. Price drew out one more document. It was a notice from the Ohio Secretary of State's office. She placed it on top of the file. "Mr. Clark," she said, "Denise Fowler's notary commission expired 11 months before the date on this deed." No one moved. The realtor stared at Carl. The younger man in the tailored suit slowly put his phone away. Carl opened his mouth, but no words came out. Mrs. Price looked down at the deed again. "And the witness listed here, Martin Hale, is the same person who signed the preliminary agreement as the buyer's representative." My heart began to pound. Carl's eyes flicked toward the younger man. The man took one step back. Then Mrs. Price said the words that changed everything. "This document raises serious concerns. I cannot process any action based on it. I will need to notify the county recorder and preserve this file for review." Carl finally found his voice. "You cannot do that," Mrs. Price met his eyes. "I can preserve a record when there is a question about the validity of a document presented at this counter." Carl turned to me, and the look on his face was not brotherly. It was furious. "You planned this," he said. I felt my hands tremble at my sides, but I did not look away. "No, Carl," I said. "Mom did." And behind Mrs. Price's counter, resting in the open file between us, was the original trust my mother had created years before. For the first time, I understood that she had seen this danger coming. What I still did not know was how far Carl had gone to get around her. The county clerk did not call the sheriff in front of us. She did not slam a stamp down on the counter or announce that Carl had committed a crime. Real life is usually quieter than that. She made copies. She placed the original deed in a secure evidence envelope. She wrote down the names of every person standing there. Then she told Carl, in a voice so calm it sounded almost kind, that no transfer or sale could proceed until the county recorder had reviewed the document and the trust records. But quiet does not mean small. Sometimes quiet is the sound a door makes when it closes on a lie. Carl left the clerk's office without speaking to me. He walked past the realtor, past the young man from Heritage Horizon, and out into the cold March air. The realtor followed him. The young man in the tailored suit stayed behind for a moment, looking at the file box on the counter. "Is there any chance this can be cleared up quickly?" he asked. Helen looked at him. "That depends on whether your company knew it was attempting to purchase trust property from someone who had no authority to sell it." He did not answer. He simply nodded once, picked up his briefcase, and left. I stood there staring at my mother's trust, at the pages she had signed years earlier, and felt something I had not felt since she died. I felt close to her, not because I could hear her voice, not because I imagined some sign from heaven. I felt close to her because I could see the care she had taken, the thought behind every clause, the quiet determination in her decision to make sure the land would not be taken from the family by the first person who treated it like a paycheck. Helen rested her hand on my arm. "Come to my office," she said. "We have work to do." For the next 2 weeks, my life became a series of records, phone calls, signatures, and meetings. I never expected to attend at 68 years old. Helen filed a petition with the probate court asking the judge to confirm the trust's terms, name me as successor trustee, and declare Carl's deed ineffective. She also sent a formal notice to Heritage Horizon and the title company explaining that the farm was held in trust and that any sale based on Carl's claimed deed was disputed. The title company paused the transaction. Heritage Horizon withdrew its offer 3 days later. They did not do it out of respect for my mother's wishes. They did it because they did not want to buy a lawsuit. The hospital records arrived the following week. The packet was thick. It included Mom's admission dates, medication records, nursing notes, physician rounds, and a log showing she had never left St. Anne's Medical Center on February 14. There was even a note from a nurse at 2:18 that afternoon. Patient resting. Daughter Rebecca Clark at bedside. Son called unable to visit due to work obligation. I read that line 3 times. Son called unable to visit. Carl had not been at the hospital. He had not been at the farm with Mom, and according to the deed, he had somehow stood beside her while she signed away 112 acres of family land. Helen arranged for a handwriting examiner to compare the signature on Carl's deed with known signatures from Mom's will, her trust documents, her checkbook, and letters she had written to Claire over the years. I hated every part of that process. It felt wrong to place my mother's handwriting beneath a bright light and ask a stranger to measure whether it was really hers. Her signature was not just a legal mark to me. It was the way she signed every birthday card, every church donation check, every note she tucked into my lunchbox when I was a child. Love, Mom. But I understood why it had to be done. And when the examiner's preliminary opinion came back, Helen read it to me slowly. The signature on the February 14 deed shows significant inconsistencies with the known exemplars, she said. The conclusion is that it was probably not written by your mother, probably. It was not the word I wanted. I wanted impossible. I wanted forged. I wanted someone to stand in a room and say, without a single doubt, that Carl had lied. But Helen reminded me that cases are built in pieces. The hospital record proves your mother was not where the deed says she was, she told me. The trust proves she could not have transferred the farm this way. The expired notary commission raises another serious question. The handwriting evidence supports the concern. Together, those facts matter. Then one afternoon, Helen found something that mattered even more. She had been reviewing the original trust file again, looking for correspondence between Mom and Carl. At the back of the folder, behind an old mailing receipt, was a signed acknowledgement dated the same day the trust was created. Carl's signature was on it, so was mine. The document stated that both beneficiaries had received notice of the Mercer Family Land Trust and understood that the farm could not be sold, transferred, or used as collateral except under the conditions explained in the trust. I remembered that day then. Carl had come late, smelling like rain and cigarette smoke from the drive back from Columbus. He had stood in Helen's waiting room, complaining that he had missed half a workday for one of Mom's farm projects. Mom had told him, "Just read it, Carl." He had barely looked at the pages, but he had signed them. He knew the farm was in a trust. He knew I had to be included. He knew Mom wanted the land protected from developers, and still, after she died, he had stood in her kitchen and told me I had no right to question him. When Helen slid the acknowledgement across her desk, I did not cry. I think I had passed the point of tears. I simply looked at Carl's name for a long time. Then I said, he knew. Yes, Helen replied. He knew. The probate hearing was scheduled for early April. Carl hired his own attorney. That hurt in a way I had not expected. Not because I thought he should have come unrepresented. He had every right to seek legal advice. But the fact that he was prepared to spend money defending himself instead of sitting down with me and telling the truth made it clear how far away he had gone. Before the hearing, his attorney requested a meeting. Helen asked whether I wanted to attend. I almost said no. But then I thought about my mother in that hospital room. I thought about the words she had not been able to finish. Don't let. I needed to hear my brother explain himself. So I went. The meeting was held in a small conference room at Helen's office. Carl sat across from me in a gray suit, looking older than he had a month earlier. His hair was thinner at the temples. Dark circles sat under his eyes. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Carl said, "I never meant for it to turn into this." I looked at him. "You brought a forged deed to the county." His eyes dropped. "I did not forge Mom's signature." "Then who did?" He pressed his lips together. "I don't know. That is not true." He sighed, and the sound seemed to leave his whole body at once. "Martin handled the paperwork." "Martin Hale?" Carl nodded. "The man who witnessed the deed and represented Heritage Horizon? He said he knew someone who could help get everything prepared." I stared at him. Everything prepared. I was desperate, Rebecca. The room went still. I had expected anger, denial, blame. I had not expected that word. Desperate. Helen stayed silent beside me. Carl rubbed both hands over his face. "My business has been falling apart," he said. "You knew sales were down." "I knew you said work was stressful." "It was worse than stressful." He gave a bitter laugh. "I had a line of credit. I used it to keep the company afloat. Then I used more to cover the first one. Then Janice found out about the second loan, and she moved out with Luke. I felt a flicker of sorrow. Not enough to soften what he had done, but enough to remember that Carl had once been a person I loved. "I'm sorry your life is difficult," I said. But that does not explain Mom's signature. She always said the farm would help us someday. No, I said. She said the farm would keep helping the family. He looked up sharply. What is the difference? The difference is that she did not mean you could destroy it to rescue yourself. Carl flinched. I leaned forward. Did Mom know about your debt? He did not answer. Did she? Finally, he nodded. She offered to loan me some money. How much? 20,000. And you wanted more. I needed more. How much more? His face twisted. Almost 400,000. I sat back in my chair. The farm was not a solution Carl had stumbled across after Mom died. He had been thinking about it while she was alive. He had watched her get sick. He had watched me sit beside her bed. And he had seen an opening. You asked her to sell it, I said. I asked her to consider it, and she said no. Yes, the word was barely audible. I felt something inside me settle. Not peace, not yet, but certainty. Carl had not acted out of confusion. He had not misunderstood a final wish. He had chosen the farm because he believed our mother's death had removed the only person who could stop him. He had forgotten about the paper she left behind. And he had forgotten about me. I will not agree to a private settlement that hides this, I told him. Carl looked at his attorney, then back at me. Rebecca, please. I can lose everything. You already asked Mom to lose everything. I did not mean. You did. My voice did not rise. It did not have to. You saw her sick, and you decided her weakness was your opportunity. You called me sentimental because I remembered what she wanted. You brought strangers into her kitchen and laid a price on the land Dad spent his life protecting. Carl's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, I almost reached for him. That old instinct rose in me, the instinct to comfort him, to make the pain in the room smaller, to forgive before the truth had finished being told. Then I thought of Mom's flowers in that hospital room. I thought of a son who had sent roses because he could not be there, and I kept my hands in my lap. The probate hearing lasted less than 2 hours. Helen presented the trust. The county clerk testified about the record owner, the expired notary commission, and the conflicting documents. The hospital custodian of records confirmed that Mom had been admitted at St. Anne's on the date listed on the deed and had not left the facility. The handwriting examiner explained the inconsistencies. Carl's attorney argued that Carl believed he had his mother's permission to take control of the farm. But permission is not a deed. A feeling is not a legal authority. And a family promise does not erase a written trust. The judge did not announce a criminal punishment from the bench. That was not his role. But he did rule that the deed Carl presented had no effect on the trust property. He confirmed that I was the successor trustee under Mom's plan. He ordered that the questionable deed remain preserved for the appropriate authorities to review. The prosecutor's office later confirmed that it had received the county's referral. I was told investigators would determine whether charges were appropriate against anyone involved. That process took time. I learned to accept that. Justice is not always a single dramatic moment. Sometimes it is a file being opened, a document being preserved, a person being required to answer questions they thought they had buried. Carl's financial problems did not disappear because the farm sale failed. His business closed by the end of summer. He sold his truck. He moved into a smaller apartment outside Columbus. I did not celebrate any of that. I did not wish hardship on my brother. But I also did not rescue him from consequences he had created. The trust allowed Carl to remain an equal beneficiary of the farm's income, as Mom intended. The south field was still leased to a local farming family, and the rent continued to cover taxes, repairs, and modest distributions. Carl received his share through the trust, nothing more. He had no authority to sell the farm, no authority to borrow against it, no authority to meet with developers or make decisions without the trust process Mom created. At first, he refused to speak to me. Then, 6 months after the hearing, he sent a letter. Not a text, not a voicemail, a handwritten letter. It was 3 pages long. He apologized without using the word but. He admitted that he had lied about Mom's wishes. He admitted that he had let panic turn into entitlement. He said he knew the farm had never been his to take. I read that letter twice. Then I put it in my desk drawer. I did not answer right away. Forgiveness is not something you owe a person because they finally tell the truth after the evidence leaves them no other choice. And access is not the same thing as forgiveness. 3 weeks later, I wrote back. I told him I was relieved he had stopped blaming everyone else. I told him I hoped he would keep making honest choices, even when nobody was watching. I told him I would not discuss selling the farm, changing the trust, or using the land to solve his debt. Then I told him the boundary I had learned too late. You may be my brother, I wrote, but you do not get to decide what our mother meant when she spent her life making it clear. The first time I went back to the farm after the case was over, it was late October. The soybean fields had been harvested. The barn roof had a new patch where rain had been slipping through. I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, wrapped in one of William's old flannel shirts, and watched the morning fog lift off the pasture. Claire came out from the kitchen carrying the old recipe box. I found Grandma's apple pie card, she said. I smiled. Does it still say to use too much cinnamon? It does. That was her secret. Claire sat beside me on the porch step. She had helped me sort documents, make copies, and keep track of every meeting while I was too overwhelmed to trust my own calendar. After a while, she looked toward the fields. Grandma would be proud of you. For years, I had believed strength meant carrying everything quietly, keeping everyone comfortable, being the one who absorbed disappointment so the family could stay whole. But standing there beside my daughter, looking at the land my mother had fought to protect, I understood something different. Strength is not silence. Strength is looking at the truth, even when it wears the face of someone you love. The farm is still there. The red barn still leans a little in the wind. The porch still needs paint. The old chicken house is empty now. But in spring, the field behind it turns green so quickly, it almost looks like the earth is remembering itself. And every time I walk through that kitchen, I see my mother at the window. Not frightened. Not helpless, prepared. She left more than land behind. She left a record of what mattered. And because I finally chose to read it, the farm remains what she wanted it to be. Not a payday, not a development, a promise kept. If this story reminded you that protecting family assets begins with knowing the original records, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs the reminder. And tell me in the comments, if you inherited family land, would you preserve it, sell it, or place it in a trust with clear rules?